Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. In today's episode, we're excited to have Brenton Murray, the founder of Electruck 4x4.com, to join us. We'll dive into Brenton's journey from starting at Tesla, then working at Rivian, and from there explore how Electruck 4x4 came to be. We'll take a closer look at the impressive range of products Electruck 4x4 offers for off-road electric vehicles. Brenton will share insights on the EV models they currently support and give us a sneak peek into the exciting EV models they're planning to cover in the future. We'll also discuss why EVs excel in off-road conditions and the burgeoning industry that's developing for aftermarket items to support off-roading EV enthusiasts. If you enjoy today's conversation, please share this episode with at least one friend or colleague who you think would appreciate it as well. And don't forget to leave us a positive review on our podcast page. Your support helps us continue bringing you great content. With that, enjoy. Brenton, thank you so much for being on today. And for those who may not be familiar, can you just give kind of like a little quick background on how you got involved and then tell us more about Electruck 4x4.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's a long story, but I'll try and keep it short. But basically, I've been a car guy my whole life. My journey kind of started in the aftermarket. I worked at a racing school in college, and then I worked at a brake manufacturer. We made racing brakes for classic cars and muscle cars. Went back to school. I kind of had a crisis of conscience where I was like, this whole hot rod thing is great and all, but I kind of also want to do something that's maybe a little bit more productive for the environment and society. And so I got my MBA in sustainability. At the time, there was this company that nobody had heard of called Tesla that was working on a roadster. And so they were on my radar. I kind of packed my bags, moved out to California and said, I'll figure it out when I got there. And just started hitting the ground, trying to network my way into Tesla. Got a job there early on with the launch of the Model S. I was at Tesla for about 5 years, moved on to another couple startups, wound up at Rivian, was at Rivian for 2 years. After that, I moved on and founded Electruck 4x4. I also worked at a company called Wind River, doing software product management for software-defined vehicles. And now I'm doing the Electruck thing full time and continuing to build and support the community.
No, that's such a great foundational background to have, to not only have the electric vehicle and kind of the software defined side of stuff that's becoming so prevalent, but then also kind of figuring out how can you implement hardware, especially kind of having like the classic car background of what was OEM and what was stock, and then kind of how do you take it to the next level and make sure all these systems and components on a hardware and also internal systems kind of work together. So let's talk about Electruck. I know you have Electruck 4x4, and then there's also the megawatt kind of product line. Let's just kind of get a overview of both, and I'm sure they'll kind of open up the door to a lot more conversations.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. When I left Rivian, back in 2022, there was an opportunity that I had identified in the market for accessories for trucks. I had an R1 or have an R1T. Knew a bunch of other folks that I had worked with, as well as just other people in the community that were owners, and that they had all expressed needs for different accessories and things like that. I also knew that there are plenty of, particularly in the overlanding space, there are all kinds of accessories that are universal, but just aren't marketed towards EVs. Things like ditch lights and various brackets and things like that, tires, certain wheels and things like that. I basically set out to market those particular products to, at that time, Rivian owners specifically, as well as to develop additional products in-house. And so one of the big items that we developed is the megawatt rock sliders, which we offer for the R1S and R1T. Early on there were some kind of more low-hanging fruits, things like sunshades and things like that we designed as well.
So rock sliders, I feel like one of the big things people have kind of talked about with, I think, just off-roading in general, but especially with some of these electric vehicles that are getting into the off-roading space. They're obviously awesome off-road. I just even rewatched Top Gear's kind of comparison between the Cybertruck and the Rivian R1T. Both did pretty amazing on challenging terrains. However, the concern I think a lot of people have in the off-roading community and just in general is just the general price of the vehicles. And so adding something like rock sliders to help kind of protect and minimize damage that could happen while off-roading, is that has that been an area that kind of lent itself, like starting with what products you wanted to develop? Obviously, in some ways, rock sliders are a little bit just physically easier to add to the vehicle. But has there been any sort of decisions around what products specifically have like the highest return? I think just a lot of people who are new to the off-road community, those are kind of the things they look at first, just because it helps them protect the vehicle, electric or not, getting into the off-road, and sometimes the unfortunate side effects that can happen with some of these fun adventures.
Yeah, that was kind of what prompted it really is I had a couple of friends and coworkers that I would go four wheeling with. We'd take our R1Ts out. This was pretty early days, so yeah, in like yeah, it was 2022 or 20. Yeah, I can't recall the exact year, but anyways,
Yeah.
we'd go four wheeling, and we would tend to push the trucks kind of hard. But at the same time, there's that kind of continual pucker factor when you're driving a vehicle that you really don't want to get damaged. And so rock sliders were a very apparent need for us. And then as I continued to engage with the communities, both online in forums and Discord and other groups and social, on social and things like that, that need was exemplified even further there. And so, yeah, I reached out to some folks that I knew from my aftermarket days, and kind of shook some trees networking wise. They introduced me to some folks who had been or who are fabricators. They've been in the off-road and custom motorcycle space for decades, building a lot of bikes for like Hot Bike magazine, and they do a lot of work with Harley, and then they also dirt bikes, and they also do some work with rock crawlers and trophy trucks and some serious off-road stuff. And so, yeah, started working with them. They're out in Arizona, which is where a lot of my aftermarket network is. So drove my truck out there, and we spent some time kind of going over, some of the product requirements as far as, what we were looking to cover, like a kick out, for instance, being a feature that was important. Obviously, the particular weight requirements for, an electric truck. And yeah, spent some time designing, and over time came up with a pretty solid product. That weren't without a few hiccups and twists along the ways, but yeah, we managed to deliver something that we're really happy with and has been very successful so far.
So I have a question for you. You're working with these great teams, but teams that have been pretty well entrenched in the combustion engine space for a while now. I've actually been surprised to the feedback and reception I have when I kind of talk about that, or like even sometimes classic car conversions. There's sometimes people who have very strong opinions, pro and con. But I'm kind of curious, what has been, in your experience, overall the interactions with these? Like, oh, I'm building these for electric vehicles. What are their kind of thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So my aftermarket experience was, yeah, in muscle cars. And so, I kind of throughout my career transitioned from this world where I would go into the office and people would have carburetors on their desks to this world where people would have circuit boards on their desks and things like that. And, the guys that I partner with that are now part of the team to manufacture these, they're, I would say, decidedly old school. They're incredibly talented fabricators. That said, I would say they're not, environmentalism is probably not high on their
Right, right,
list.
right.
Great guys though, and so they're interested in and curious. I mean, in developing new products. They see the vehicles starting to be on the road more and more. They know the direction the industry is headed. They just saw the opportunity as well, and so I would say we exchange some jabs at each other about whether it's politics or various things. And so but for better or for worse, we're all aligned on the same ultimate goal as far as expanding of the availability and support of accessories for these trucks. And we've been really able to develop some really awesome products as a result.
Yeah, I think that's great to hear, because I think that's been my experience too. Environmentalism probably isn't the top reason for a lot of people in the, whether it be the classic car or the off-roading spaces. But what is pretty interesting to me is, that aside, they're always pretty interested in the performance and the actual
Sure.
like usability or like how effective it is. And I think more often than not, they're pretty open to kind of like learning more and have a curiosity around it. And you're right. I think there can be some friendly jabs made here and there, but it usually is in kind of good fun versus
Sure.
like being completely shut off to the idea. And there's an element, I think, also kind of times are changing, but at the end of the day, especially in if it's performance related, I think what is more interest to them is like if it's better, they're into it, or they
Totally.
at least want to be aware of how it, in what areas it's better.
Yeah, I think with the exception of, like the true like zealots who are
Right.
anti EV or whatnot. Yeah, when it comes down to it, we're all in this industry or in this car culture because we enjoy them as machines and the things they can do and the places they can take us. And so any vehicle that can do that in a different or perhaps more performant way is of interest to it. Just kind of transcends politics or things like that. But yeah, early on, we'd be out on the trails and we'd come across like an H1 Humvee on the trail or
Right.
an old Jeep or something like that. And you kind of you get a little uneasy. You're not sure how this interaction is going to go down, and almost every single time, whether it was here or Arizona's a little more. I live in the Bay Area, but in Arizona is a little more conservative. People have been. It's been positive across the board. People are really curious and interested, and it's been really awesome as a result.
Yeah, I actually have family down there and took a EV conversion course that's offered by a company down there called Legacy EV, and I
Yeah,
think it has been really interesting to see that sometimes there will be definitely defenses and kind of walls up by a lot of people when you start talking about this. But I think pretty quickly there's once they kind of know you know what you're talking about for sure, and that you're trying to come at it from like a logical position of either performance or having clear metrics of what you're trying to accomplish and how like an EV may accomplish that better. It's definitely been pretty positive, and people start kind of. I actually, when I even took the course, it was really funny because I was pretty much kind of the only, let's say, average Joe in there. There's a lot of people from different companies, and quite a few were actually from Shelby America.
hmm
And so, them obviously building the massive like Shelby, uh, I think everyone knows the Shelby Mustang cars, but now a lot of their cars are actually like jacked up Shelby F350s and stuff that are just like on a whole nother level. But they were also like pretty quickly they saw that there's a huge area for this where these electric vehicles, whether it's Pikes Peak or off road, that have some pretty big advantages. So that's kind of great to hear. And it's interesting being bring up Arizona because I think when a lot of people think of the uh, kind of not necessarily off road, but uh, third party space for cars. Southern California, I think, comes up for kind of tuning and like that sort of stuff. But there's such a large kind of industry now. I think there has been for quite a while, but I
sure.
found it pretty impressive just over the last decade. And maybe it is some of it has been a shift out of Southern California to the Phoenix area and kind of beyond around just off-roading, classic car, and then now even EV conversion kind of stuff in the Arizona area. Are there any things that you've noticed as to why that is, or any preference to kind of working with third-party teams in that area?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the aftermarket has been, I'd say, strong in Arizona for a while. That said, you're right. I mean, when you think of hot rods and things like that, SoCal is definitely kind of the powerhouse, right? Um, that said, yeah, over time, you're starting to see the economics in general of whether it's labor or real estate prices. The combination of that is driving a lot of that growth in the Phoenix area. The area you also have a lot of automotive culture around. Barrett Jackson is out there, Russo Steel, the
For
variety
sure.
of other auctions out there, and so that drives the automotive culture big time. But yeah, so I think the exciting part actually is the growth in the EV space in particular, right? So obviously, Lucid being in Casa Grande, that kind of
Right. That's a good
was
point.
the big, I would say that one of the first big stakes in the ground. The the OEMs have been using the proving grounds outside of Casa Grande for everything, EVs and otherwise for a while. But yeah, now you're starting to see, Li-Cycle is out there for battery recycling. You're starting to see a lot of other folks in the space starting to grow there, as well as, the off-roading culture as well. I mean, particularly growing up right there. I don't know if you're familiar with the term desert rat, but that's kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
like that sort of desert off-road culture is big out there, and so you need parts and accessories for that. That's spurring that aspect of the aftermarket as well in the Phoenix area. But yeah, a lot of different avenues of growth out there.
I think that's just awesome to see because there's been a lot of concerns, I think, around like electric vehicles. And I think a lot of it, in some regards, is valid around electric vehicles replacing jobs and like what is needed for the next generation of vehicles. But it's also been, I think, a lot harder for people to look at how to kind of go to the aftermarket or how to improve their vehicles beyond maybe just aesthetic stuff. I think we're finally starting to see some of it's right to repair, some of it's the automakers, especially the startups, kind of being more open to sharing some of the software and other stuff so you can actually, I wouldn't say tune so much, but actually have more access to that and like knowing what's going on with the battery to kind of take these aftermarket improvements to the next level. Now, with the off-road side of stuff, it's in some regards obviously aesthetic, but there's a lot that you can bolt on that, while aesthetic, has huge things exactly like rock sliders, where it isn't maybe so defined like maybe the uh, aftermarket for performance or car side of stuff versus off-roaders. So I'm kind of curious, you started with rock sliders. For those listening, can you share what vehicles that Electruck 4x4 right now is kind of focused on in the EV space, and maybe which ones you're looking to expand to offering additional items for in the future?
Yeah, I would say right now we're primarily focused on the Rivian segment within the EV space. We also offer a handful of products for F-150 Lightnings. The Cybertruck is something of interest to us. We're kind of seeing how things play out there. There's obviously some support, a decent amount of support already for the Cybertruck. But yeah, at this point, it's been primarily focused on Rivians. The Silverado EV is another one that is possible. I think some of the kind of traditional or legacy OEMs have been a little slower on the rollout
For sure.
of trucks and SUVs, and so yeah. And then I would say on the Tesla side, I'm sure somebody will have some feedback about this, but the Cybertruck, it's I would say it is a very capable and dynamic truck. That said, off-road, it might not be quite as capable, at least, until the couple upgrades or OTA updates or whatnot later, as like some of the other trucks. Like the Rivian is a very capable vehicle, and being passionate about about four-wheeling, it just that personal passion has really driven a lot of that interest in developing new accessories for that vehicle, those vehicles in particular.
For sure. And it's kind of interesting, some of the vehicles that you mentioned that you're covering and looking to cover, because I'm curious, when you talk about like Rivian R1T, it obviously has that kind of off-road. That's a huge part of why people buy the Rivian in general, let alone the R1T especially. And I think when you look at the R1T and even the Cybertruck, off-road differences aside, they're kind of considered more kind of lifestyle trucks.
Sure.
And I don't know if that's necessarily the right. I think people kind of say that to almost cast them off. But I look at both vehicles, and obviously I want to see more of the Cybertruck. But what I think is really cool when you look at it as like a spider graph, both of those vehicles, maybe they don't do, I would say like the, speaking of like the F-150 Lightning and the Silverado, those are very focused, like traditional kind of work trucks
right,
that have kind of evolved to be more lifestyle and like SUV replacements. Whereas I think some of the ones from the startups are a little bit more, cover a little bit of everything pretty well. And so I'm kind of curious with the off-road and just like the aftermarket things that you're offering, are you seeing or even positioning the different things for like maybe what you do for the Rivian R1T as being more focused for off-road, and then for the F-150 Lightning, probably some off-road stuff, but also maybe more for like if you are using it as a work truck, or kind of a clear different use case day to day for what these additional items are?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think the startups have done their homework or chosen a great path there as far as pursuing more lifestyle, if you want to call it lifestyle trucks or whatnot. Just the margins are going to be a lot bigger there in terms
For sure.
of yeah. So compared to a work
That's a
truck,
good
which is
point.
going to and so we are support just by nature of kind of what those owners tend to be interested in and gravitate towards. That's where the majority of our support there is. The other thing is, the F-150 Lightning. This kind of goes back to what I mentioned about there being off-the-shelf products that are already available but just not
Right.
marketed. It sharing the same, a
Underpinnings for a lot of
a
this
large, yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. So suspension items maybe not quite the same. I mean, we do have a number of F-150 Lightning suspension items in our catalog. I'm not sure if they're online right now, but we do have the have access to those, and so we do support it. But that said, right now it's kind of the bread and butter. I would say low hanging fruit that it appeals to kind of the broader ownership base rather than just off road or lifestyle sort of owner.
Gotcha. And so when you start looking at, like you mentioned, Cybertruck, Silverado, obviously a big component of that is the actual volume of these that will be delivered. But what are kind of I'm just curious from your side, what are the determining factors? Like, okay, we're going to start offering it. Is it has to be volume, or are there other kind of considerations that go into what future vehicles that you want to kind of offer support for?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the determining factors are a lot more basic than that.
Gotcha.
We're an entirely bootstrap company, and so it comes down to what's a mix of what are the capital requirements in terms
Yeah,
of developing new accessories, and then what is the potential return. And so I owning an R1T myself, that makes it a lot easier to, particularly early on, to develop products for.
for sure.
And then now the community in Arizona has been incredibly supportive. So we work with a number of owners out there for measurement and engineering of new accessories. I don't have a Cybertruck. I know a handful of folks who do. It's the we just kind of need to see what the ownership is going to be like. What sort of delivery volumes are going to be
For
for the
sure.
Cybertruck and things like that.
So, and that totally makes sense. Kind of taking a step back, when you're talking about kind of choosing the right products, what, not even for which cars, but I mean, or trucks, but what has been kind of the determining factors, or like, is it market research, or is it on personal, like, of like figuring out like, oh, the R1T definitely needs rock sliders, and then kind of like, what are some of the things that you're offering today for people listening, and then maybe go into some of the products that probably aren't ready just yet, but ones that you're hoping to really offer, maybe in the medium to longer term future.
Yeah, we engage with the community a lot on various forums as well as on social media. There's also a couple chat Discord and other channels as well that we're engaged on. So yeah, we work with owners there as well as with the Rivian Clubs of America. They've been great partners of ours, as well as just a variety of other places like that to perform market research and really assess kind of like what's the demand. The other aspects that we look at are is there an offering in that for that product already? Is somebody already offering that? And then what is what sort of design and engineering requirements are going to be needed in order to develop that product? What does manufacturing look like? Is that something that can be easily, produced here domestically? Is that something that has to be made abroad? Some hybrid of the two. How complex is the product? Is there assembly required? Things like that. So we kind of take all those into consideration before determining, where we're going to go next.
Gotcha.
Uh,
That. Oh, what were we gonna say?
yeah, and then I'd say coming down the road, we're looking into a number of other off-road products for the R1S and R1T. It's there. The platform, has been revised recently, and so we kind of need to, that will obviously influence where we go next. But I would say things like steps or running boards as opposed to rock sliders or something that's on our radar in the future. There are a handful of other items for mounting things in the bed of the R1T that are also coming down the pipe. Yeah, those are a couple of them. Yeah, I mean, it's a passion project of mine. It's something that I've put a lot of time and energy into, but at the same time, I also have a day job, and so that kind of split, and obviously now with a growing family, that makes time a resource that is not as easily. Uh, it's harder to find somebody who's willing to invest time as opposed to other resources, and so that also is a factor.
For sure. With kind of where you are, and like you said, there is a lot you're kind of juggling, but obviously there's a big interest in the space. With where you are now, what are some of the things that kind of like surprised you along the way to get to where you are, whether it be maybe things that were more difficult or just maybe there being a larger market than you expect? I'm just kind of curious what have been the challenges, good and bad, maybe that you can share with us.
Yeah. Well, there have been quite a few challenges. I mean, with the platform itself, the R1 platform changed. There were some cost
Mm.
reduction changes that were implemented that required us to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer some aspects of a couple products like the rock sliders. That was a hiccup that we overcame. When you're bootstrapping something like this, everything is new, right? So everything
Right.
from packaging, finding a carrier who's going to who's going to support direct consumer freight on an ongoing basis, things like that's been a learning experience that we've overcome. We also do manufacture parts abroad, so there's for I tend to use we I'm very particular about which parts we'll build domestically versus abroad, and it's kind of, without naming any names of retailers, but there are inexpensive tool resellers that many automotive enthusiasts go to, and I use the same philosophy for when I buy tools from those sorts of stores, and it's the dumber the part, the more acceptable it is to manufacture it abroad. If it's a solid chunk of aluminum, sure, with the right partner abroad, we can co-produce that, or contract those sorts of things. And so it's the building the supply chain for that, as well as we also drop ship and resell a variety of other products as well. And so building out that network of suppliers has been a learning experience. And then everything. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of other than the actual assembly and engineering of the rock sliders, I'm kind of the chief cook and bottle washer here. And so, learning everything from the e-commerce platform. We use Shopify, which luckily is very intuitive, but kind of lean back on some of
Right.
prior work experience for some of that other software stuff. But yeah, there's been learning kind of across the board, and changes that we've had to kind of follow in order to stay competitive and keep growing.
I realize you're doing obviously the majority of kind of getting this off the ground and the bootstrap side stuff, but if you're willing to share, if there's anyone listening, are there any skill sets or something that might be of value that if someone wanted to work with you to reach out to maybe kind of help you get Electruck moving even faster, or just kind of keeping the momentum going?
Yeah, something that actually I found that has been really unique to this particular startup. I've had a couple other startups in the past, but something that's very unique about this particular one is the community aspect.
Hmm.
We've worked with owners who also are building their own parts. I've worked with owners. There's a great guy who lives in Oregon who owns a machine or a manufacturing company, and he's co-produced some parts for us out of stainless steel, and been really great there. I've worked with a number of owners to design and engineer accessories like brackets and things like that. So shout out to my friends over at Soonish.com. They've been fantastic partners. We've worked together on we make iPad brackets for the seat back out of
Oh, nice.
stainless steel. And so yeah, I would say folks with engineering expertise, that's been great. Working with folks there. That's probably the biggest the biggest one. I'm a software guy and an at a I would say aspiring mechanic. I can rebuild an engine or do things like that, but I'm not an engineer by trade. And so having someone particularly with like Fusion 360 skills, that's really kind of
Yeah.
like that's really the biggest part. It's the transforming the sketch into
Right.
a digital model that is then manufacturable, and then that can then be tested, to ensure performance and things like that. That's kind of those are the skills that I'm looking for, really.
No, that's great to know. And hopefully anyone listening can definitely kind of reach out and help you with that. With where you're looking to kind of take Electruck 4x4, can you share any of the roadmap maybe that we haven't discussed already, that I realize this is kind of your passion project and you've got a lot you're juggling right now, but is there anything you can kind of share for maybe like the next year as far as roadmap for where you're looking to take Electruck and maybe expand into?
Yeah, I think Cybertruck is definitely on the horizon. I think we might pursue more of a reseller route there, more so than megawatt building megawatt products. I think there are a handful that it's possible we might make, but yeah, it's kind of a greenfield right now. We
Yeah.
want to kind of stay abreast of where things are headed with the R1 platform. And so I think, yeah, a combination of kind of, I guess you could call it maintenance, and just staying up to speed with changes on the platform, as well as expansion into more of the Tesla vehicles. That's kind of what we'll see over the next year.
Okay, that's great. And I guess this kind of maybe brings a couple of things together. You're talking about not just expansion of your business, but like one of the areas you're trying to work on more is community. And I actually am involved kind of with the Central Oregon Land Rovers off-roading group here. Obviously not really EV focused, but is that something that you're looking to do on the community side? Is looking to kind of do even maybe not like longer trips, but even kind of day Rivian or other kind of focused vehicle off-road trips, or even just EV focused off-road trips to maybe build awareness or kind of get the name out there more? Because I found that to seem like it's a really effective way for people in kind of your area to get the name out there and definitely get those kind of adamant customers that want to really return for specifically your products.
Yeah, so we work a lot with the clubs, Rivian Clubs of America, both at the national level. Those folks have all been great supporters and customers, as well as the individual local clubs. The club in Texas just did an event that we sponsored,
Oh, that's
here in the
great.
Bay. Yeah, here in the Bay Area. There's the folks in New York. There's basically, yeah, nationally there have been a lot of events that we've supported. There are also a handful of off-road schools that use Rivians. And so we've been fortunate enough to connect with them, and they've become customers and advocates for our products. And so yeah, really continuing to engage with the community, to from we want to be we're owners just as much as we are contributors and suppliers. And so we want to continue to participate as well as learn from the community to figure out how we can continue to better serve them and support them.
No, that's all great and kind of awesome to hear, because I think that that has been an area that I don't know. I feel like over the last 5 years there has been such a and maybe it's like a unintentional kind of outgrowth of COVID. I feel like there has been a much larger interest in overlanding and kind of off roading, almost like a rebirth. I feel like it's always been a thing, but I just feel like and maybe just personal experience, I just feel like there's been such a growing interest that we just haven't seen for a while. And going to kind of where you're based, I'm really curious. Like in the Bay Area, I lived down in Palo Alto actually for a little bit, but I'm kind of curious. Like for you, where are some of your favorite trails or like best areas to go off road and kind of get away from things?
Yeah, it depends on how long we're going to
Right.
go for. Hollister is great because it's right there.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Carnegie's nearby. There are a variety of SVRAs and OHV sites that are accessible and a good time. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Sierras, so anywhere from Lone Pine to Tahoe.
Oh, cool.
There's great stuff. Death Valley is I've got a soft spot for Death Valley. There's some great trails out there. Infrastructure that kind of comes back to the unique aspects of off-roading in an electric vehicle, and so it's been a learning process. Particularly over the last couple of years. Luckily, the charging networks, particularly in California, are getting more expansive. But even then, there's still areas, if you're out in Arnold, which is a small town, kind of, inland a ways, kind of on the way towards Tahoe-ish. Um, it's kind of a charging desert, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of good trails out there. It's funny that you mentioned the COVID thing, because that's kind of what reinvigorated my interest in four wheeling. I grew up kind of stealing or borrowing my dad's truck, going four wheeling, for years. And then more recently, when COVID hit, I was big into camping and backpacking, but campgrounds started to get closed down, and so
Right.
I kind of turned to my wife and I said, like, campgrounds be damned, we're getting out into nature. And so I bought an old XJ Jeep. It
Oh, nice.
was yeah, it was one of the more interesting and also one of the more ramshackle vehicles I've ever owned, but it was great. Got us out there, and that kind of then continued on to into the R1 ownership and things like that. And it's been awesome.
Yeah, I'm kind of like I think that's been one of my things lately. Is a lot of the trips we've done are kind of day trips, and I'm definitely looking to do more longer, uh, kind of few day, if not more extensive trips, or even doing just a long road trip across the country, and then kind of having a couple multi-day kind of detours here and there. But it's interesting you mentioned the infrastructure side a bit because I think a lot of people talk about that. And I think in general, EV charging has come massively from where it was a decade ago. And I mean, DC fast charging wasn't even a thing pretty much a decade ago.
Sure.
And now where we are today, and you go by like I-5 and pretty much any of the major corridors, especially for kind of passenger vehicle EVs, that's not a problem. But being based here in Central Oregon, really within the last year, actually both Tesla and Rivian have expanded their charging options, especially north and south, and then if you're going west. But you head east to here, being in Bend, there really isn't much until you hit Boise. And so that is kind of interesting when it's looking at Rivian. One of the cool things I've thought they've done, obviously, they've kind of maybe slowed down on the DC fast chargers, but they offered a lot of level two charging and kind of working with the national parks and getting
Sure.
more places for that, which I think is kind of the perfect balance. You really don't necessarily need DC fast charging. You just need more plentiful and reliable level two charging in a lot of these national parks and other areas like that. I mean, I'm just kind of curious, has that been anything that with what you do and kind of your background working at Rivian and others, is that going to come up as far as like a partnership opportunity of like trying to look at areas to kind of help extend and maybe speed the charging opportunities, even through kind of sponsored or advertised ways, add a lot more kind of off-road opportunities.
Yeah, I have a number of friends on both. I guess you say that. Yeah, on the supercharger team, or still,
Yeah,
as well as destination charging, and as well as at Rivian on their Waypoint team and their RAN team, and I think
the
both of
Waypoint
their
team, right?
and each of them, they're kind of often under the same umbrella, but each kind of has a different mantra or different methodology that they have pursued to building out those charging networks. And so, DC fast charging, you're looking at corridors between spots of where you're going to be camping. But I think that, for those overnight lodging, I think that there's an opportunity there for partnerships with campsites. It would be great to see, more national parks, as well as U.S. Forest Service campgrounds,
Yeah.
to have integrated charging. It's I personally prefer more backcountry camping and four wheeling, and so having a 30 amp charger at a campsite is luxury, which is fantastic, which is great. But I think the opportunity to see more level two charging at campgrounds is definitely an opportunity that needs to be capitalized on.
Well, and it's kind of interesting you talk about that too, especially when you start getting the more off-road and really kind of making your own path sort of EV adventures. And there have been some really wild and interesting, they're still pretty early type, but kind of solar roof mount things that I've seen for a couple different EVs that essentially do spread out and kind of unlock to anywhere from 1 to 2 kilowatts of solar, which is a decent. I mean, it's
A
not
lot of solar, or I mean, for portable. Yeah,
especially if you're going to be like camp there or something. It
sure.
obviously will kind of cover whatever usage you're going to use for your water and some other stuff, and maybe recharges the battery a little bit. But I'm kind of curious. I'm sure as someone personally who's been in the EV space, like one of the first things you get asked about are kind of why don't you put a solar panel on it? And I'm just kind of curious, being on now the off-road and the side that you're on selling these products, I'm sure you get a lot of questions around kind of products around that, or how has that been?
Yeah, it's that conversation has been the same since I
Right.
was at Tesla. At first it was road trips pre-supercharger, right?
Yeah.
How are you gonna go on a road trip? And so it's really difficult to kind of convey it in a way that sinks in and
Right.
registers with people until you actually like try it and own it. Then if you really understand the kind of how overblown a lot of the range anxiety is.
Yeah.
Four wheeling, we'll go out for a couple days out in the backcountry, and when you're sitting there camping, you're not consuming a lot of power, even if you do have string lights hooked up and
Right.
an inductive cooktop and all these other things that are great luxuries to be able to have and run off your truck. You still don't use that much, and then when you're rock crawling, you don't consume that much energy. You'll spend a whole day out in Hollister and use under 100 miles, or I'm sure somebody's going to blast me for an inaccurate statistic there, but you'll use significantly
It's
less mileage than you would
right.
expect.
It's kind of the only situation it seems like where your power really goes is if you're doing a lot of sand stuff. And
Sure,
then, and
high
obviously then
speed.
you're kind of, yeah, I mean, yeah, high speed or even just kind of mess around the sand. And, but even then you're right. Like the majority of the time, especially rock crawling stuff, it uses definitely some, but the delta is pretty small compared to what you think it'd be, especially as opposed to like doing highway driving or something.
Well, and
Uh,
then you have regen, so I mean, you get that back
exactly.
too. Yeah. I mean, we've gone to King of Hammers the last couple of years,
Oh, cool.
and that's way out, in Johnson Valley. And there's this last year we towed a trailer as well, and so I would say that is the only time when range anxiety has become a thing, is
Fair.
that combination of middle of nowhere and towing. That said, Optima has been great. Optima Batteries has been great about providing charging out there. They've had this whole hydrogen-powered DC fast charging setup this last year, so we were able to continue
Oh,
charging.
cool.
Even then, though, I think you could still do a night or two out there and still be fine. But yeah, I mean, as long as you plan, if you're if you're just going four wheeling or overlanding, if you're in the backcountry, you're going to use significantly less than you think you're going to use. Although it's nice
Yeah.
to plan with a buffer. But yeah, you also get regen back, and so you're going to get that back as well. And so yeah, I think it's just it's a learning experience, and just you kind of have to do it in order to fully internalize it. You can talk about it and have it
Right.
register, but it doesn't actually register until you do it yourself.
No, and I think I even kind of realize how fruitless, like, usually adding solar to any sort of EV is. But there have been just, I feel like it's only within but like the last 6 months. And I still don't know how practical it is. But there are now these stationary things that
Sure.
essentially are roof mounted that fold out. And now it's still not a whole lot. But the fact you're kind of getting around the 2 kilowatt mark, you're like, okay, that is a decent amount of solar. And that could actually, if you're not driving far or if you're like based camp for a couple days, it's
If you're
probably a
not in the
net positive. Yeah.
if you're not in the trees,
Yeah,
uh,
well, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
I would say, when we first started going out, and we it was a concern. I was like, okay, well,
Yeah.
what if we run out of range? But and so I found myself driving on conserve. I'd be on these dirt roads, just, I mean, traction was mostly there, but probably could have been in a different drive mode, but just for the sake of using as little
As
energy as
possible, yeah.
possible. And so and then we complete the trail a day or two later, and we would wind up with so much more energy than we needed. That over time, it really started to kind of push the limits. And so, yeah, I mean, that while I initially was like, we had this whole plan, I was like, oh, I'm going to get a solar array and a couple
Yeah.
batteries and blah blah blah. And then you got the whole generator people. What if,
Well,
yeah,
and I
but
and I'm like, as someone who's been in the space for so long, I realize it's really not necessary, but I still kind of fall for it every now and then. Like, God, that does seem kind of cool just to get, you don't have a generator, you don't have to have anything. If you have like just enough solar, it doesn't need to be a lot.
I would
And
say it's
especially when
it's
the battery's that big, yeah, you could be like post out, especially like in Southeast Oregon or anywhere in the Southwest. It's like you
yeah.
could be out there for a week at least.
Yeah, I think it's definitely that,
It's more a water issue at that point. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's kind of, it's the dream. It's the ideal
Yeah.
scenario.
Exactly.
Unlimited gas from that, falling from the
Yeah.
sky.
No, exactly. Well, okay, so let's. I realize we're kind of coming up a little bit here, but when you're looking at some of these products that you're trying to offer for Electruck, have there been any? I think one, it's just such a new thing to have. Obviously, electric 4x4 is that anything is kind of a great option. But are there any things that you're most excited about, or like you really want to maybe take to the next level for specifically an electric 4x4?
You know, Suspension systems, I think, are an opportunity there. Obviously, focusing on Rivian specifically right now with the air suspension, which is fantastic.
Right.
The truck is kind of a Swiss Army knife of performance, which is great. Great road handling as well as off-road handling. That said, long travel suspension, higher ground clearance, and things like that does provide an opportunity, particularly for more aggressive off-road or higher speed. I think we're starting to see more and more motorsports involvement from the in the off-road space. I think things like short track racing and other more off-road, Pikes Peak is fantastic,
Yeah.
but it would be great to see more off-road
Pikes Peak before
involvement.
it got paved, I think would be like the perfect right.
Yeah, but I mean, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
there was a Rivian. I know there was definitely a Cybertruck at the Mint 500 this year. I don't know as far as actual competition wise, but just having the representation there, and I
For
think
sure.
from there you'll start to see more, those suspension systems that are capable of supporting, higher impact, longer travel, higher performance. Those sorts of things are something I'm really excited about.
That's a great topic actually, because there's so many people, even coming from the non-EV space, like the Defender world. Everyone's
Sure,
all about that hard axle, like traditional kind of setup, like in the old Jeeps and
sure.
obviously the Land Rovers. And I'm a big fan of them personally, but what starts getting really interesting is there's a couple of companies, one in particular out of Australia called Airbag Man, which is just such a funny name, but they have an airbag ride system for a hard axle, and it is truly not just about like delivering a better on-road experience, but what it can do off-road without impacting your travel and stuff is unbelievable. It's obviously not the cheapest thing, and I think there's a lot of kind of predisposition, and understandably so, from some of the history of like air ride systems being really finicky or braking, and then you think, well, semis use them, there's a reason. But either way, people start kind of getting scared off because it does seem like it's such a much more. There's obviously an electronic component to it. There's just the air unit unto itself. And so that's really interesting to hear that. And it makes sense that there'd be an opportunity for that. But you look at the Rivian, you look at the Cybertruck, both of them have air suspension setups. What do you think are like the easiest ways to get those big wins? Is it really just increasing the ride height, increasing the ability for travel? I've heard from some on the Rivian, and I'd be curious on your take on this, is the air tank itself kind of could be bigger, and is like that something you could see as even being a replacement too?
Yeah, obviously there's trade-offs with,
Yeah,
raising suspension. Drag goes up significantly. You're going to lose a lot of range. And so I think for an off-road or motorsports application, those sorts of lifted or long travel suspension systems are more kind of like traditional, shock and spring setups can be a bit, are great options. You're seeing airbags. Continental makes a great product, and so you're
Right.
seeing things like airbags on and air ride on yeah, the Cybertruck and on the Rivian, because you're trying to be that jack of all trades, right? You want a truck that you can take to the track and then you can take off road, and you can't do both of those things unless you have the dynamic suspension, in an airbag, or other, other dynamic suspension. So. Personally, it's a longevity thing as well as a complexity thing.
Fair.
Trail repairs, being a Land Rover owner, I'm sure you're all too familiar with the hunting down leaks on
Yeah, yeah.
lines and things like that. But yeah, I think it's a great product. They're great. It's a great configuration. I just think for that sort of more high performance, you start to have to. There are trade-offs that have to be made,
For sure.
and that's kind of how yeah.
Well, that kind of just reminded me of something. Does the Rivian, does it have an electronic, does it have a sway bar, or is it essentially kind of like because of the fluid system that it has, the hydraulic system it has, it kind of creates like a fake sway bar essentially?
Yeah, so it has hydraulic roll control.
Yeah,
It's very similar to some of the systems on McLarens, and yeah,
right.
basically it
Which is very cool.
compensates. Yeah, it's really cool. It's and again that's another one of those things where it's like, okay, you want to make something that's very dynamic and performant, but at the same time, then you wind up with additional complexity. And
For
so
sure.
I think in terms of like the future of overlanding and off road, particularly truly off road capable EVs, I think simplicity is something that we're gonna need to see
Yeah,
more of. Also, in terms of affordability,
for sure.
Rivian's a fantastic vehicle, but there are a lot of bells and whistles, and so I think some of that could be stripped out for the sake of just durability, longevity, and obviously affordability.
Well, it's funny you should say that because I was going to throw out possibly a product idea for you guys. If you do go down the path of Cybertruck, because one of the interesting things about it, just with the research I've been doing, kind of looking into it, is it does have a sway bar, but it doesn't have a physical or
Disconnect.
electronic disconnect.
Sure.
And just some of the reviews I've been watching lately is like obviously now that the locker updates kind of gone out, it's definitely improved pretty significantly its off-road ability. But the travel issue is kind of still, it's not bad, but that could be an area where it'd be better. I'd just be curious on, because I feel like it wouldn't be, even if you did a manual one, that would be a pretty big improvement. And that may be a quick off-road win for people who are looking to do that with their Cybertrucks.
No, it's a great point. I mean, yeah, I think lockers are probably like the a pretty transformational
Yeah,
change.
yeah.
But then, yeah, independent suspension does have its limitations in terms of travel, and being able to disconnect that sway bar would go a long ways.
And I'm not as familiar with the electronic systems like on Toyota. I mean, obviously that's kind of the big one with a lot of the newer Land Cruisers and the Forerunners, is they just have an electronic one.
Sure.
Do you know if that would ever be easy to do as like a third or essentially aftermarket retrofit option? Not
You
even
know,
Cybertruck, because I just don't think I've even seen that. I could be wrong. I just don't think I've even seen that many for other vehicles.
yeah, I think, if I recall correctly, there are some reliability issues that Jeep owners have had with,
I'm sure, actually, yeah.
with Rubicons, and just having that sway bar disconnect. I think a lot of folks actually have deleted it.
Interesting.
But yeah, with the right with the right platform, I think it's a retrofit is not out of the question. But I think the cost associated with it, as opposed to something that's manual,
Yeah,
might not be worth the trade off.
for sure. Interesting. Um, well, no, I've really appreciated this conversation, and this has really been just kind of a fun area to talk about that I'm excited to see grow more. And I think honestly, it's been an area, especially if you're on the West Coast, that I think a lot of people I talk to, it's part of the reason they've kind of held off on going to EVs is maybe they're not a traditional Jeep or some other kind of driver, but they have a Subaru or something because it has the ground clearance and has a little more of at least the adventure ability
Sure.
that you really haven't seen until the entry of Rivian. And like we've kind of talked about, as of now at least, there's still a bit of a price issue. So seeing more opportunity and just kind of future products coming out to help with that, I think such a great thing. If there's anyone that's kind of looking to reach out to you or learn more about your product, what's the best way to kind of get in contact with you or like learn more about Electruck 4x4?
Yeah, and folks are welcome to email me. Email me directly, Brenton at electruck4x4.com. There's always the website, electruck4x4.com. We're on a number of social outlets. We're pretty well engaged. The door is always open. Live chat, any of those things. Very accessible and happy to engage with folks about their trucks, about just the industry, the hobby or passion for trucks and off road as well.
And I think that's actually something to mention. Did you say before our conversation you'll be at SEMA this year? Are there any other events that you'll be at, just yet, that maybe if people want to talk to you or meet with you in person?
Yeah, let's see. So, I've been going to SEMA for a while. I'm not sure if I'll make it this year. I'm going to try. Same thing, King of Hammers. We've gone the last few years. I'll try and go again this year. Let's see. There are a couple EV expos we'll be going to as well. I would say, if folks are in the Bay Area, definitely shoot me a note. I'm also out in Phoenix pretty regularly. Otherwise, just email and all that other stuff. Happy to engage with folks.
That's great. And thank you so much for coming on today, Bren. Looking forward to kind of just seeing the company grow and talk with you more about this space specifically. So we'll definitely have to have you on soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chase. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Grid Connections. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Brenton Murray, the founder of Electruck4x4.com. It was fascinating to learn about Brenton's background, the genesis of Electruck 4x4, and the innovative products they offer for off-road EVs. We hope you found insights on the current and future EV models covered by Electruck 4x4, as well as the growing aftermarket industry for off-roading EVs, both informative and inspiring. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with at least one other listener who you think would appreciate the insights as well. And don't forget to leave a positive review on our podcast page. Your feedback helps us to continue bringing you engaging and valuable content. Thanks for tuning in, and until next week, this is the Grid Connections Podcast signing off.